Hello, I'm Chloe Tilley. Welcome to this Google Hangout brought to you by BBC World. We're live on the BBC News YouTube channel. You can watch us for the next 30 minutes. We're going to be discussing sexism and who is to blame. It's all part of the 100 Women season here at the BBC. If you're watching live, you can see down the side of the screen that we have a live Q&A. If you want to get involved over the next 30 minutes, that is the best way to do it. But so many of you have been getting in touch on Facebook, on Twitter over the last 24 hours or so with questions which I'm going to put to our guests. They're here with us now. You can see the four women on the screen with me, and they're each going to introduce themselves. They're going to give us an idea of who is to blame for sexism. Is it men? Is it women? Do they have a role in this? Is it society? Is it lawmakers? Well, let's have an introduction, first of all, from our guest in Egypt.
Hi, my name is Dua Abdel. I call myself a feminist, and I'm a women's rights advocate. I'm also a board member of the International Solidarity Network of Women Living on a Muslim Nose.
Okay, and let's go next to our guest who's in Mexico.
Hello, I am Gisela from Mexico. I am a lawyer and a specialist in women's rights and digital rights, and I am part of this high-impact protest group named Femin.
Well, welcome to this hangout. Let's go to Vienna now.
Hi, I'm Susan Tahmasabi. I'm an Iranian women's rights activist and an Iranian American. I am the co-founder of the International Civil Society Action Network. It's a US-based nonprofit with global programs.
And finally to Thailand.
Yeah, Shalitapan Songsampan, teaching political science, feminist theory, and also politics of sexuality at Thammasat University in Bangkok, Thailand.
Well, a warm welcome to all of you, and I want to speak to Dua first, but I'm keen for you all to chip in as we go along. Dua, I know that you were very much involved in the Arab Spring, so I wonder if you yourself have experienced a lot of sexism in Egypt. Maybe you could share some experiences with us.
Well, I have to say it's part of our daily life. It's not because of what's so-called the Arab Spring, but because it's actually how we go through the day as women, and some of the most of the time as men as well. So it's not new. It's part of what we face every day, from what we have to do and what we have to wear and where to walk and how to walk. It's actually contributing to shaping our daily life. Like, for example, I would like, for us women here in Egypt, like simple practices that might be usual in many places, like riding bicycles or running down the street for half an hour out of workout or something like this. These are the small, simple things that are not expected from women to do or to practice in their daily life. So you can imagine that is how we go on a daily basis. It's also for men themselves, is what is expected from them, how they are overseen, what color even to go to their clothes, or how they are, their outfit. So it's basically contributing to very small things in our how we choose our wardrobe for the day, to, you can imagine, up to everything, politics and lawmaking.
So before I want to go to one of our other contributors to get their personal experiences, I'm interested. You say that women, it's frowned upon to ride bikes, even men have to think about what they wear. If people go outside of those norms, what's the penalty?
I wouldn't call it a penalty, but you would get from verbal harassment to physical harassment, because we have to see the whole picture. Sexism is part of all these power practices. So the society practice huge power against individuals on our everyday life. So if you are a woman riding a bike in Cairo and someone realizes that you are a woman, you can get from cars, people driving cars shouting at you that you have to take the sidewalk, and to people actually pushing you. So it's part of the practicing of how people refuse that you are out there and doing something that the society doesn't see normal or acceptable.
Well, Dua, stay with us because I want to bring in Suzanne now, who is an Iranian American. I wonder what experiences you've had, because that's two very different cultures that you've bridged.
Sure. I mean, I think sexism actually cuts across cultures. It's a common and phenomenon and a common experience regardless of your culture. And I want to point to some societal structural issues that bring to light the issue of sexism. For example, in my country, Iran, we still have very strict gender codes that are codified in law that promote discrimination against women, but also require of men that they play out very strict gender roles. Now, in the U.S. as well, we have something very similar. I mean, it's played out in a different way, but still there are very strict gender roles that women's groups have been fighting for a long time. I know in the 80s when I first came to the U.S., the issue of domestic violence was a contested issue, right? When women faced domestic violence, they were told by police to go home. So this is something that, even in the U.S., it's an issue that has been dealt with more recently. And currently in the U.S., just as in Iran, women's rights to their bodies and their reproductive health rights are contested rights. So there are a lot of similarities. We have progress in some areas, in some contexts, but not in others. So I think it's a common experience among women and among men across countries, in the West, in the East, and I think that it's something that both men and women can relate to, no matter where they're from, because gender roles cut across cultures, even if they're played out a little bit differently.
Well, let's bring in Gisela, who's in Mexico. Can you identify with anything you've heard there from your perspective in Mexico?
Yeah, I mean, I really like what Susanna said, that sexism cuts across cultures. I think it's true in different degrees. In my experience, well, I like to talk more about gender more than sex. I don't know, because it like this gender discrimination, these roles that are like constructed, it's kind of the same thing, but I think it's worth it to make the distinction. And for me, in these gender roles, in these roles that you're supposed to follow, they are oppressive because they don't let you be who you want to be, however you want to assume yourself. And for me, my experience it's twofold. First, that I grew up in a very conservative Catholic environment. It's called the Legionaries of Christ, and it's one of the most powerful legions in Mexico. They have a lot of money and they have a lot of power with the state. And eventually, when the founder died, they knew that he had, he raped a lot of children and all these, church scandals and all this. So I grew up in that, very conservative environment where gender roles are educated. They are not questioned, but they are imposed upon. So you had to marry a virgin, you have to cook, you have to be a mother, even if you don't want to. No abortion because it's like a capital sin, and overall this notion of prudency that reminds me of what Doa said, right? Cover yourself, your body is a source of sin for men. So, and afterwards I became an activist of Femen, and what we do is topless protest to try to show that the body is not erotic itself, but it can have artistic or political connotations. And it strikes me how people in Mexico react overall. I mean, all over the world, but Mexico is my country. And it's, for one side, a lot of aggression from people in general. I'm not even saying men. And from the other, it's the erotization of my body, even if I want it to be political and even if I conceive it to be political when I protest.
I want to bring in Chalidapon, who is in Thailand, because I wonder if there's a more modest interpretation of feminism in Thailand. When you hear about that Femen in Mexico, whether Thailand has a different approach to it.
and let me put it this way. I think I agree with all of our panelists today that these gender differences affect our social lives in almost every culture on this planet. But gender also manifests itself differently. So it is quite nice to compare. And the sexism can express itself in a very subtle way. So when we talk about this harassment in the women in Egypt, so many women in Egypt, or maybe in Iran or some other parts of the world experience, this harassment can come in the form of verbal harassment. Let me just use myself as an example. I am a middle-class woman teaching in the university. So most form of harassment I have been facing in my life is verbal. So sometimes it's very difficult to point out to people. That's why when we talk about sexism, so many BBC viewers might think that this is so outdated because you cannot perceive it as sexism, or you cannot perceive it as harassment or this discrimination or devaluation to some other people based on genders.
I can see one question which has come in as we discuss this. I can read it off the screen above me. It's well-known fact that males and females have distinctive differences in all branches of science, from genetics, anatomy and psychology. Today, why do we have the desire for equality when both sexes clearly have major and inherent differences? Lyndon Lee has posted that. I wonder who wants to pick up on that point. Suzanne, why don't you go?
Well, yes, of course, there are biological differences between, the sexes, but gender roles are socially constructed, and gender inequality is also a social construct. There shouldn't be discrimination against one gender or one sex based on the biological differences. And there's nothing to prove that, women have less capacities than men do, or that that people cannot choose their own identities, their own gender identities based on social construct. I mean, I think that, this is an old argument. The fact that somebody raises it shows that there is actually inherent, there's so much sexism that there's a great need for awareness. But I don't think that biological differences should be the basis of discrimination against people.
I would like to say something, if it's possible. I think that's why sexism and racism have so much in common. It's like saying that black people are inferior because of a biological trait. Of course, there are biological differences, but they are not relevant in terms of equality and of capacities. They are more socially constructed, as Susan said. So, I mean, I just want to point that, like saying that men and women have inherent genetic and I don't know, psychological differences is the same as saying that black men or Asian men or Mexican men or whatever are different, and I really don't agree in that.
But there is a fact, isn't it, that if, for example, there's a job that involves lifting, that I, as a 5'4", quite slim woman, would not be able to lift as much as a big, bulky 6'7" guy, and maybe that's just fact, isn't it? I mean, we got one comment in here on the World Have Your Say Facebook page from Chia, who is a man in the UK, and says, let me tell you my experience. I work in the UK, mainly working in a bakery, a normal worker, and I'm on the same wages regardless of sex, and whether I'm a good worker or not, I get a rise. But the delivery of bags of flour, etc., only the men carry the heavy sacks, and that is my experience of sexism. But I don't think I'd be able to carry a heavy sack. So is that sexism if I'm not allowed to carry it? Do I need a choice?
I think it's quite different. It's quite different between this ability, this physical ability, and the way we value those abilities or the differences. So some men might be able to carry heavy stuffs, but many men cannot. And it's also true among women too. So the point here is not about biological differences itself, but it's the way we value or devalue certain characteristics or certain biological traits that men and women or male and female have in each society.
Stuart, do you want to pick up on this?
And if I may come in, yes. It's also, why is it always when we talk about sexism is we talk about physical ability? Like